Sometimes when you're driving down the road all by yourself, you begin to hear a voice that tells you need to look around, pay attention, maybe something isn't quite right. That voice is me. It's the voice of Gord.
Morning, everybody. How's it going? Been a little while. Awful sorry about that. Podcast production's been a bit slow around here, but we got a new one for you. And I'm looking forward to this conversation with Stephen Ruhe, fellow, trucker family man, I guess. He helps his dad's company over there in Ohio, and on the side he researches the sort of history of trucking in the United States, and he's got a new project out called Semi-Historic, where he's going to be posting his research and writings online. I think he's going to start a YouTube video. Stephen joins the show to discuss all of that fun stuff and how history is rhyming. And, a lot of people like to blame the problems in trucking these days on the Motor Carrier Act of 1980, and Stephen takes it even further and says there's lots of stuff that was wrong with the Motor Carrier Act of 1935. Nothing new under the sun, as it were. I think you guys are really going to enjoy this discussion, and I think you'll greatly enjoy his project. So head on over to Semi-Historic. There'll be a link down in the show notes. Next show I've got lined up for you guys is with a couple of gentlemen from the Trucking Association of New York. Hope to get that out later this week or possibly early next. I've been very busy with book stuff and life and wife and kids and all the usual excuses. Speaking of the book, you might have seen me on C-SPAN here a few weeks ago. It seems like problems in trucking are finally breaking through to the mainstream out of the sort of right-wing media silo, as it were. Good friend Craig Fuller from FreightWaves was just featured in an op-ed in the New York Times. So that's pretty cool. I'll have a link to that as well. So lots going on. If you haven't yet, head on over to creedandculture.com. You can order a copy of my book, End of the Road, Inside the War on Truckers. I just gave a talk on that at Cornell as well. So if you want to watch that and check that out, I'll have that in the show notes too. Hey, thanks for being here. As always, if you have any questions, comments, suggestions, corrections, or hate mail, or just want to say hello, send me an email, gordylocks@protonmail.com. If you like the show, tell a friend, spread it around. Word of mouth is the best advertising and the only one I can afford. So thank you very much for that. And let's get to the show. Let's get to Mr. Stephen Ruhe at Semi-Historic. Hey, good day, everybody. Welcome back to another fantastic episode of the Voice of Gord podcast. I'm Gord, and this is my voice. The other voice you're about to hear is a character in the trucking industry I came across on Twitter, like so many of my other guests. And like myself, multi-generational commitment to the trucking business. And this gentleman has started a new project documenting the very early stages of trucking, like right back to the turn of the last century. And he's going to tell us all about that. So please welcome to the show, Mr. Stephen Ruhe.
What's up, Gord? Thanks for having me.
Yeah, man. Thanks for coming. Another early Saturday morning recording, dragging people out of bed for the benefit of my listeners.
Yeah, you're avoiding the chaos of the kids.
Yeah, you and I are both fathers of young families. How old are your kids and how many do you have?
I got 3 of them, and they're 5, 4, and 1.5.
Ooh, boy, you got your hands full.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and they've been sick the last 2 weeks, and last night was the first time I slept through the night in a couple weeks, and I'm still not sure if I've caught up.
We tried to do this last weekend, and you had to cancel because of all the sickness in your house.
Yeah, it was rough.
Yeah, away she goes, Bubs. My children are a different kind of handful. They're now 6, and the older one's going to be 8 here next month. And they're good kids, but they go through their little tantrum phases and want to fight you about everything and don't want to listen and take forever to get out the door when you're trying to get them to school and go to work. And so yeah,
Yep.
full household over at my place too. So
Yes.
introduce yourself to folks who might not know you. I know my audience is kind of all over the place. Not everybody's on Twitter though. So
Right.
tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got into trucking, and what you're all about.
Yeah. So, as you said, my name's Stephen. I'm a third generation at a family trucking company. It started by my grandfather, and I I grew up in it. My dad was at a company before grandfather started this one, and it was my first job cleaning out reefer trailers and working in a shop. And then after high school, I was convinced I was never going to work in logistics, so I went off to the military. And then COVID hit, and I've been sucked back into the industry, and I probably won't ever leave. And so now I run the brokerage arm of our company. So by the end of this month, we'll have it'll be about 200 trucks, 3 terminals, and I run the brokerage. This is about 7 people.
Wow, that's a pretty expansive operation.
Yeah, Dad's motto is you're either growing or you're selling. And we've been fortunate enough, even through the downturn with trucking, that we have just continued to grow. One of the decisions we made during the COVID boom, when everyone went and bought trucks and took out loans and spent $200,000 plus on all these overpriced equipment, we paid down debt, and we were able to build a new terminal with cash. So it's been we've been pretty fortunate the last 3 years.
Paying down debt. Wow. Let's get you and your dad in government somehow. Maybe you can.
Yeah, it's not something most people do.
No. Speaking of your dad, he very, very kindly spoke with me on the phone one time, and I quoted him in my book. So
Yeah,
sounds like
he was excited for that.
yeah, sounds like your dad, pretty good dude.
Yeah, he's let's see, I am 30. I'll be 36 this year, and this year is Dad's 37th year in the industry, and he had me when he was 19. This is what he's loved, and it's been just a big part of our life. My grandfather was the same way. He started off really young in the 60s and had his fights with the Teamsters, and they actually worked for Victory Express when the Fuller family bought him out and wrapped him up in the U.S. Express.
Oh wow, no kidding. Small world.
Yeah.
And a very busy world. The thing with trucking is like there's always something going on. It's very dynamic. Lots of news and freight X here in the last few days, and specifically Craig Fuller got to drop an op-ed in the New York Times yesterday. That was pretty cool.
Yeah, the last, I'd say probably last 8 months to a year has just been, every weekend it seems like there's a headline in some major news outlet in trucking, which is something that never happened for us unless there was an oil crisis or COVID, or you were stuck in traffic behind 2 semis. Like, no one even really thinks about the trucking industry.
No, it's just one of these magic things that happens in the background, and the grocery stores are always full, and the gas stations usually have fuel, and you go down to the parts store if you need something for your car, and everything just kind of happens, and nobody thinks about it too much because it works for the most part.
Right. And to that point, one of my biggest pet peeves is even people in our industry today, when they talk about deregulation, they like to say, well, there's 18,000, there was 17,000 carriers. Like, well, that's not true. There was 16,600 regulated carriers. But the part that regulation got wrong in 1935 is there was 115 to 150,000 private carriers that weren't regulated, that actually ran 55% of all the freight on motor carriers. And depending on who you cite, whether it's a private carrier conference or the GAO, they accounted for 83 to 95% of all the vehicles on the highways. And it's that subsection of carriers during regulation that got us to where we are today.
Yeah, so I think what you're explaining here is sort of part of your new project, Semi-Historic. For people who don't know, that might not be truckers listening to this, what's the difference between a private carrier or common carrier?
Yeah. So the biggest thing is, so in 1935 when they set the Motor Carrier Act, there was already definitions for a private contract and common carriers. So common carriers are carriers that hold them out to the public for hire. Contract carriers will still have an authority, but they are contracted to shippers or a few shippers, and they only run their freight. They're not someone you come to give your business to. There's a contract in place. Private carriers, their primary business is not transportation on paper. So their profit center cannot be transportation.
No, they're only moving goods for themselves. So you're company X that produces product Y, and you have your own trucks Z to move those products, and that's it.
Right. And this is where the lines get blurry, because if you're, the predecessor to, say, Super Ego, your primary business is a leasing model, or your primary business is a shippers co-op, where you're managing a group of shippers' inventory, and you just happen to own trucks that move that freight.
Yeah, when I was a kid, so I grew up in southern Ontario, specifically the Niagara Escarpment area, so sort of in between Niagara Falls at the border with New York and Hamilton. And there's a little place called Vineland, and there was some kind of fruit co-op there, because that stretch of land before they started growing houses 30 years ago at scale was the most productive farmland in all of Canada, because it's there's this like bench that used to be underwater when Lake Ontario was much deeper after the Ice Age, and it's just super fertile soil. And it's got its own microclimate, so it's one of only 3 places in Canada you can grow grapes. There's a bustling wine industry there. Peaches, plums, strawberries, just all kinds of fruit. And there was like a sort of, I think it was called the Vineland Cooperative Growers Association or something. Please, somebody who's listening to this who's from home can fact check me on that. I don't think I got the name right, but the thing is that it closed when I was a kid. And they had the same sort of thing. They were just a sort of co-op for all of the farmers to, sort of market and move all of their fruit. And one of my friends in high school, still a good friend of mine to this day, a guy named Kenny Etherington, his dad was like a owner operator for the co-op. So he had a truck and he moved the co-op's fruit all over the place, and often hauling it into the United States and then bringing backhauls back to go to the market in Toronto or whatever. So he was sort of a private carrier on the co-op model, as you described it, for outbound, but was always hauling backhauls too.
Right. And that was one of the things. So when you look at the different court cases over the hard thing with tracing the Motor Carrier Act is a lot of the issues are handled at the ICC level, which come out in monthly reports. They don't actually hit like traditional courts as they do today. And currently they have, I think, like 48% of those digitized. So it's like requesting from the National Archives these like 800-page ICC reports that would come out every month and get sent just to like thumb through cases and see what was going on. But even as early, I think it was like 1936, they had lawsuits with private carriers and backhauls trying to lock them down into place so that they can't, trying to create that clean definition of this is a private carrier and this should be a regulated carrier. And that happens constantly up until 1978 with the Toto decision, where that's pretty much, that court case is the end of regulation. That's the ICC just saying, you know what, this is coming to an end. We're done with this. Private carriers can just, you can do your backhauls, whatever. And then 2 years later, it's gone.
Yeah, wow, that's an interesting component to the story. I was not aware of. It often is in many facets of life that there's some weird arcane court case or battle somewhere, and then the ruling from which sets precedent for everybody else. There was a gentleman I had on my podcast a couple of years ago, and whose work I referenced in the book. He's a former truck driver and now runs something at the University of Minnesota. They have like a trucking research school within the University of Minnesota. His name is Stephen Burks. And when Burks, before he, went to school and became a, academic, he was driving truck, and he was telling me a story about how, during the regulated days in the 70s, there were certain lanes and certain products, and they would do the certain product out as the front haul. And then they were always like, well, it's hard to like figure out a back haul under the rules. So they would just back haul whatever they wanted and hope they didn't get caught. And he got caught a few times and was telling me about being pulled over and given a hard time by the DOT for having the wrong product on his flatbed,
Right. And that's because like the private carriers, the way they got away with it most of the time was the buy and sell schemes. So they would, if they needed a backhaul, they would just find like, say, a furniture company, which is what would be a regulated commodity, and they would just buy the product in bulk, knowing that it was going to a place that they could just sell it to. And the furniture company and the receiver would just adjust their bills accordingly, like, hey, this carrier is now the owner, and then they'll sell it to us for the difference. And they don't actually exchange money. It's just the paperwork looks that way. And then it's legal.
Yeah, no, the guys I used to work for did some of that, and that's where we have, also the whole like fake trip leasing thing where you have a typewriter in your truck and you type out a trip lease, and there was all kinds of things to like get around all these like weird rules that just made business difficult to engage in. But this is all very interesting, especially, I mentioned Craig Fuller and his op-ed in the New York Times because we have a new evolution in trying to get around rules. But this is not just for doing business. This is not like, hey, we're just trying to like do a backhaul. It's, hey, we're not going to fix our equipment or maintain anything. And why even bother with these Americans that like want an actual salary and stuff? So let's just skirt all the immigration and work visa rules and employ people from all over the world, and to hell with these locals that actually want to have a job.
Right. And it's funny because like today it's bad because it's mainly like the illegal immigrants and the ATA, and they're lobbying for the truck driver shortage and all that nonsense. But it's a story that has been around trucking since the first truck was invented in Cleveland.
Yeah, I was reading that. I was reading your new website there. Is it semihistoric.com?
Yeah. I'm not in love with it yet. I still got to tweak it, but that's where I'm going to put articles, and eventually I'll have the YouTube channel and the videos will be on there. But yeah, the first installment's on there with Alexander Winton and all that. But yeah, during that time, so that was 1898, and the biggest thing with trucking is, especially in that time, is you have to understand what was going on in the country to really understand why the 1935 Act happened in the first place. So that in 1898, you're right at the tail end of the Gilded Age, which is the industrialization of America and its businesses. And for the first time in America, more people were employees than they were entrepreneurs or self-sufficient. So you have immigration, which from, I think it was from like 80 to 85, or maybe it was 85 to 90, 3 million people had come into the country, and that was 2 times more than the previous 5 years. We have that going on. Cities, for the first time, are 1 million plus. New York City was at 1 million in like 1860, and there was only 10 cities with 1 million people, I think, in that time. And then by 1900, there was 30 cities with 1 million people. And they're all trying to navigate these workplace issues. So when the truck's invented, you have the Gilded Age, and there's workplace safety, there's labor issues, labor unions are coming up, there's a rise in nativism because the immigrants are taking the low-paying jobs, and people are now fighting for gainful employment. And then from there, you move into this progressive era of regulating the food and drug industry in 1906 and getting labor unions under control and trying to ensure some sort of employment for the people that are living in the country. Because there was this, I think his name was Henry George. He ran for mayor in the Labor Party in New York, and he wrote a book called Progress and Poverty. And it was the first time anyone had like put in writing the topic that everyone was thinking, where at first, if you were in poverty, the idea was that's your fault. You should be doing more. And that's kind of an idea that we have now. But what he had written was poverty was because we've taken these entrepreneurial options away from the majority, and now they're having to be employees because there's no other options, because it's such a dense population. It's not like it used to be.
Yeah, there's also there's a lot going on there, right? Like there you also have there's a certain strain in America, and like, the Protestant work ethic, and then the sort of frontier mentality, and the sort of there's this idea that sort of underlies what it means to be an American, which is like, you go and you do stuff yourself. You got to get on your own 2 feet, pull up your boots, and let's go. And that idea goes back a long way, and it comes in a bunch of different directions. And yeah, sometimes it runs into these sort of hard realities of various economic swings and dynamics such as that. And I can only imagine, the turn of the century, and now you've got all these people living in cities from a previously agrarian society, and it's kind of like what happened in England with enclosure in the first industrial revolution, right? They sort of like closed off the commons, the fields and forests and whatnot in rural England, where you could just like go live there. And like, nope, that's all private now. And if you want to do anything, you have to go work in this big, crazy, smoke spewing factory. When that, part of that was when they invented looms, and they displaced all kinds of people that like wove their own fabric. And that's where we get the term Luddites, which is often mistaken for people who are against technology. What it actually was is people who are against being displaced out of their jobs. The Luddites were not necessarily anti-technology. They just didn't like the way that their culture of handicraft and self-employment at home was just totally annihilated by steam-driven loom technology, right? So, we can have arguments about technological progress and sort of inevitability of this stuff from like an economic or material perspective, and that's fine. But I think the Luddites have been remembered by history very unfairly, and just simply written off as, oh, you guys just all hate technology. Well, no, it's not a matter about hating the tech; it's everything that comes with it.
Right. Yeah. And I think the biggest issue, especially around this time, is and it's very reflective of what's happening now, not just in the industry but as a total, is there was so much rapid expansion in how things happen that the politicians really could not keep up with how to manage it all. Society is going through a huge shift. The economy is going through a huge shift.
Wow, that sounds familiar, doesn't it?
Right, exactly. And this is what drew me to this period anyways, because like what a lot of people I just found this out probably 6 months ago. Prohibition wasn't actually about alcohol; it was about immigration.
Wow.
And
Okay.
they,
Please lay that out for us because I'm interested to hear this take. Please.
it's fantastic. So the Anti Saloon League, which sounds like a Marvel character, was a real thing, and they were started somewhere in the 1850s, and it was originally about alcohol because at that time sanitation wasn't a thing, so most people drank alcohol, and I think on average it was like 7 gallons per person per month of alcohol is what they were drinking, which is more than what we're doing today.
Well, on the sanitation thing, I've read about this too, where they didn't like there was not modern water treatment at all, and the only way to guarantee that what you were drinking was any good was to drink beer. Like kids drank beer, workers at factories drank beer all day long. There was just beer everywhere.
Yeah. So you tie that into immigration and what was happening in these cities, especially Chicago. Chicago's a big one that I'll get to in a second. But as the immigrants came in, they would go to the cities to go find work, and then they would have these 24-hour saloons just outside the major industrial areas. And what those saloons had were mainly for the immigrants. They would be in all different languages, and you could come and get breakfast or whatever. And whenever, like I say you went there and got a breakfast sandwich, they would just hand you a beer, right? It would just come with it. So then, now you're starting your day off with booze, and then you go and get, then you go to work, and then you come back for lunch, right? Come back for lunch, you get some more beer, and then what ended up happening in Chicago at a meat processing plant is an immigrant was at work. He was drunk, fell into the line. That immigrant got processed and packaged and sent out to consumers with the rest of the meat. And Upton Sinclair wrote a book called The Jungle, which got really popular. And that's where the Safe Food and Drug Act was signed, which had pushed industry standards for safety. And Henry Ford was famously anti-alcohol and high family values. Like, you had to be sober. And a lot of that was because the other thing that was happening at these saloons is where labor unions would get started. So it wasn't because he wanted good people at his company. He just didn't want the labor unions coming in and shutting down his plants like what was happening to the mines.
Where else do we see saloons and taverns and beer halls where people give rousing speeches and political movements are born? Man, where have I heard that before?
Right. But yeah, that was the most interesting fact to find out of that period.
The Prohibition thing, it created some strange political bedfellows. So, and you see echoes of that today, right? So, my mother-in-law, God bless her, she did bear me my wife. She's a teetotaler. She does not drink, and she frowns on people that do. And what do you know? She's also a very hardcore progressive and talks wistfully about the progressive movement, that time in history you're discussing, and the suffragettes and getting women the vote and all that. At that time, the crossover, as it were, is that the people advocating for giving women the franchise were often also the same women running the temperance movement, right? Let's shut down all the booze and give women the vote. So, like, you're a guy and you worked hard all day at the factory or out in the field and you want to have a beer, and your nagging wife comes along and says you shouldn't be drinking beer, and by the way, we're going to vote to make sure that you can't drink beer. And then now we have prohibition. They say that misogyny is some kind of problem. Again, it's one of these like fake social issues that doesn't really exist. I would imagine that it did at that time.
Yeah, and it's funny because some of the more famous speakeasy people in that time were women. Like, there was one, I think she was in Texas. She owned like 10 or 15 different speakeasies across Texas, and they would come in, they would shut one down, and she would famously just open up a new one, because even during Prohibition, like, it was outlawed, but people still did it. So it was kind of like this slap on the wrist, keep going, whatever.
Yeah, there's a really interesting book. Have you ever read A Renegade History of the United States by a guy named Thad Russell?
I have not yet.
You, with your project here and the things you're showing interest in, you need to go read that book. It's also available on audiobook. In fact, Renegade History of the United States is the very first book I ever listened to on Audible when I put Audible on a smartphone in like 2011 or 12. I was a little bit late to the smartphone game. But anyway, in Russell's book, he talks about the female entrepreneurship on the frontier, as it were, and the fact that women were liberated in the frontier in the late 19th century and made a lot of goddamn money, running saloons, running brothels, buying and selling land, because their brothel or their saloon for all the miners in all these frontier towns. They would make tons and tons of money. They would reinvest it in land. And famously, he pointed out in his book that the city of Seattle's public school system was originally founded by this lady in Seattle who was like a gazillionaire from running brothels.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I don't know if it's the same person, but there was a lady out that way. I think it was Seattle. It may have been San Francisco when Prohibition had ended. She made a bunch of money selling rum runners, boats, and yachts to people after bootlegging was no longer viable because everything was legal again. So these boats, and at that time it was a Great Depression too, so these people couldn't afford it. So she was selling these boats and just making a ton of money off the boats. And she used to run speakeasies.
Yeah, I have a prohibition connection in my family too. So I'm from Canada. My pardon me, on my dad's side of the family, his his mother's family are all from Italy, and a little place in northern Italy called San Daniele. I think that's where they invented prosciutto, or they claim to have anyhow. But anyway, my great grandfather, Rudolfo Fluviani, uh, was killed in a mining accident in Sudbury, which is at the time the home of the world's two biggest nickel mines. They're still like two of the top five today. Anyhow, great grandpa dies in this accident, and now his widow, my great grandmother, is sort of left with all these kids and has to support everything on her own, which she does. And so she has this great big huge chicken coop in her backyard. And for like having chickens, right? You got a whole bunch of mouths to feed. You need eggs. So she's got this massive chicken coop, like almost industrial grade. And during Prohibition, the local Italian businessmen, as we'll put it, approached her, knowing that she's a widow, has all these kids, and that she would be a easy target for business opportunities. And they said, "Hey, we want to store some things in your chicken coop because it's sort of nondescript, and we can just put stuff in there, and nobody will notice what it is. Nobody's going to question you because you're a widow." And guys will come and put stuff there, and then sometimes they'll come and take it out, and we'll pay you, and just keep your mouth shut. And she said no. She knew what they were up to, and she knew it was illegal, and she wouldn't let her pride would not be abused to get involved with criminal behavior or gangs. So she said no, and we never did. She never did run booze out of her chicken coop.
That's crazy. That would have been. I would have said yes just for the story. But that's me. But yeah, that tie to Canada and South America during Prohibition is also a fun story. Because Mexico never got rid of alcohol, but Canada did for a brief period, shorter than us. I can't remember exactly how long it was, but there was a lot of the Italians for sure, but people were getting trains and boats. They'd go up to Nova Scotia and run a bunch of alcohol back down to the States, and then the trucking companies at that time would just load them up on the trucks and take them wherever.
Yeah, obviously, when you have a widely sought after illicit substance that moves at pretty high volume, yeah, you're going to need trains and trucks and whatnot to move it. So I'm not surprised that trucking played a role during Prohibition and continuing to move beers for the hardworking men of America. There's this, I got to get a photo of it. There's this bar here in Ithaca where I live, and it's called the Creeker, or the Fall Creek Tavern. Locals just call it the Creeker. It's right near Ithaca Falls. So like there's literally, Fall Creek comes from north of Ithaca, comes right through Cornell University, through the gorge, and boom, there's this massive, massive, beautiful waterfall. Everybody comes to take photos of it. Carl Sagan's old house overlooks the waterfall on the opposite side from the Creeker. So it's it's a pretty significant place. But the Creeker is kind of a dive bar. It's very sort of working class. Also very dedicated to Cornell's lacrosse team. There's like lacrosse helmets on the walls, and it's a joint, man. It's got some character. And on the one wall inside the bar, they have a photograph from Prohibition of these men protesting in the streets, wearing suits, looking all very professional, with these big signs saying, "We want our beer."
That's awesome. When I went to DC a couple weekends ago with the family, we stopped in it was a town in West Virginia. I can't remember what it was, but we went to this bar that was built in the 1920s, and it was every picture on the wall was women's suffrage from that time. So it was all the different protests from the women, like if beer touches these lips, your lips can't touch mine, like stuff like that. It's fun to see like the protests in the ad. That's one of my favorite things in this project, going through old newspaper clippings to find like driver stories, because the trucking industry has just been what I say is it's always been a footnote on the consciousness of America up until recently, which is a major factor in why things are the way they are. Because if everything's going well, nobody cares. Even if it under the surface it's awful, if it's not making headlines, nobody cares.
That's a good point. You're right. As long as the groceries show up, I think what's happened today, we're at this inflection point where people are starting to care. Is I can hear your kid in the background. I know that story.
Also, you forgot one part.
What?
It was the part where there's the purple trees.
Oh yeah, the cherry blossoms in DC. Yeah, those were cool, huh? Can you go have a seat? Let me finish this up. Thank you, buddy.
I love it. My daughters often come and interrupt me too. I think it's great. I never edit it out either. I leave it in. Kids are awesome.
Oh, they're the best.
But no, interesting. I think so. Yeah, we're at this point where the trucking industry is not working. I mean, things are still being delivered, but the problem is the public is noticing the problem, right? We have all these very high-profile collisions. Some would say that the only reason we're noticing it is now because of the speed of social media and the way news travels. But the problem is that even though they try and make it illegal, patterns are noticed, and
Right.
we have these very high-profile collisions. People are being killed, and we're talking about kids. There's a law before Congress right now. They're deliberating, called Delilah's Law, which is a package of legislation meant to deal with the patterns of collisions we're seeing on our highways, because people do want the groceries delivered and they want their consumer society to work, but they don't want it to come at the cost of all these crashes and collisions. Crashes and collisions have always been a sort of fixture of driving. People make mistakes. Shit happens. It's going to be with all of us. Doesn't matter what you look like, where you come from. Shit happens, as they say. But when you have extra shit happening, and that extra shit is because people are breaking the law and not supposed to be in the country, and the carriers employing them are basically gangsters who are also breaking many laws in order to get into the business, that's a problem, and people are noticing the problem.
Right. They are, and the oversight, the lack of oversight is the issue, right? So if you look at 1935, which I put this post out a couple weeks ago, and I said, the Motor Carrier Act of 1980 wishes it was the villain that the Motor Carrier Act of 1935 actually is.
Yeah, explain that, please.
So kind of what I was talking about with the Gilded Age and Progressive Era, in 1925, there's this trilogy of cases with the motor cases, and basically what was happening at that time is you have the highways that are getting built, and all these nice new roadways from federal government, and the states are trying to figure out how to get money from the carriers that are using them to keep the roads nice. So there's this case in Michigan, there's one in Washington, where they're trying to apply common carrier status to private carriers to bring in that revenue. And the United States Supreme Court says no. They're private carriers. You can't do that. It impacts interstate business. We're not going to let you do that. And then enters Joseph B. Eastman, who's a major player in this 1935 Act. He was an ICC commissioner with the railroad, becomes a transportation coordinator. He has a long history in government, but he's what brings the motor carriers into 1935. And what he does is he references these cases, and then and instead of going by those cases, he actually flips it and says, you know what, maybe they should be common carriers. Maybe we should just bring them into the same thing with the railroad, and then we can institute safety. Right, so then there was two trucking associations that merged together in 1933 to become the ATA. You have the Teamsters at that time, who are also pushing, so drivers are working 16 to 18-hour days in trucks that have little to no suspension. Pneumatic tires have been around for like 5 or 6 years at this point. And if you damaged cargo at that point, it was the driver's fault. It came out of their pay. And then in 1934, in Milwaukee, there was this, I can't remember the name of it, but it was like this anti-labor union. It was a newspaper and a group of business professionals, owners, that just squashed labor. And that all culminated to what is called Bloody Sunday in Minnesota. And truckers were protesting from the Teamsters Union. A couple truckers died, police officer died, and then it became this like week-long thing. And then that really pushed this 1935 Act through, which was sold to the public as a safety initiative. But what ended up happening was they introduced rate controls. So you've got commodities on certain lanes, and you had to apply for that. And then you have entry controls of public necessity and use. And then it was safety. So they had hours of safety rules that they put into place, which really hasn't changed much since 1937 when those were finalized. And then because of the just sheer volume of rate and entry control issues, safety gets put on the back burner. And it always has for years. So to our point earlier on like how headlines in trucking to the public make policy change, in 1950, have you ever heard about the blast in Oregon?
No, sir.
So in 1959, there was a private carrier who was hauling dynamite and ammonium nitrate on the same truck. Caught on fire.
Ooh.
It leveled 8 city blocks, killed 13 people, 100 others were injured, and 7 years later, the DOT is formed.
It usually takes disasters to get people motivated to do something about the little sort of simmering problems that are, again, beneath the surface, right? Nobody, as long as everything's working, nobody cares. When a problem takes place or a bunch of problems take place, then they start caring. Again, now we have today, and since 2024, the number of high-profile collisions and crashes and people being unalived on our interstates with the common thread of chameleon carriers, insourced labor, and everyone's watching, their social media feeds. And then finally, August of last year, we have the U-turn thing. And I mentioned this in the book. That was solid 2 weeks of the news cycle. Trucking is never in the news for anything for that long. Maybe it's a day, maybe it's 2 days, something takes place, whatever. But 2 solid weeks, that U-turn thing dominated the entire news cycle.
Hey, go tell your brother to come downstairs. Yeah, it was that dominated the news cycle, and really, I mean, there hasn't been much before that. You had, the capacity crunch and COVID that was kind of hitting the news cycle and stuff. And back in 1959, I think this is what shocked me the most is this is how unregulated private carriers were, right? So private carriers are mentioned in the 1935 Act, but the way Joseph B. Eastman talks about them is their purpose is to become private or common. So like that, they were trying to encourage these private fleets to become under authority, and it never plays out that way. It actually, what ends up happening is most of your private and common carriers end up consolidating and becoming bigger, and these private carriers never consolidate, but you just keep getting more of them because it was easier to open and operate those. And in 1959, that private carrier that was hauling dynamite and ammonium nitrate on the same truck in downtown Roseburg, Oregon, they weren't being policed by any kind of hazmat or and it wasn't until that incident that the transport of explosives, like the regulations on that, which existed at the time, and hazmat safety, got pushed onto those carriers. Before, they didn't have to follow those rules. The only thing they had to follow was hours of service. And even then, if they didn't carry paper logs, it wasn't like, it was just a slap on the wrist. Because that was the other difference between your regulated carriers and your private carriers, is a regulated carrier had criminal and civil penalties for breaking safety rules. The private carriers only had criminal penalties, and usually they didn't get hit with them. It's like a speeding ticket.
That's interesting how 2 separate sort of sets of rules for people. There's also ways of there's ways in which there are separate sort of sets of rules, different strokes for different folks that are sort of unwritten, and we live in this time now where some folks are expected to play by the rules, and some folks are given leeway because historical injustice, or they don't know any better. And we're seeing this now, right? So we're talking about history, and then we have today. And another thing that was in the news this week is I guess there's some kind of governor's debates or something in California where they were this televised debate, and they're talking about how the Secretary Duffy and Trump and the feds are enforcing English language proficiency requirements, and all these guys in California are like falling over themselves to denounce it as racist, and we're not going to enforce this, and we're going to fight back against the Trump administration. And that sort of creates this similar thing where, certain trucking operators are expected to like be perfect and do all the stuff. But like, if you just showed up here yesterday and, oh, you're some poor migrant, you don't have to follow the rules. We're not going to deal with the chameleon carriers that employ you. We're not going to enforce this English stuff, which started under Obama. They stopped enforcing it. And it's like, why do we have two different sets of rules, right? Why is it that like when a homeboy rolls up to the scale, gets the full level 1 inspection, and then one of these other guys rolls up and the DOT are like, nope, just keep going, because if we give you the full level 1, maybe we get accused of being racists or something. So a whole lot of these guys just they won't do it. This is part of the issue, is that there's a lack of enforcement on this stuff. Like, we all understand the scale of the penetration of these chameleon carriers into the market and who they employ, and the numbers that Duffy is talking about with enforcement are like a drop in the bucket. The out of service orders is a ticket, like it doesn't mean anything. And it's like, okay, cool. So we have two different sets of rules for the people that are established carriers and then these new guys, because we're supposed to worship the new guys for some reason, depending on like what your political proclivities are. And it's frustrating for people who are trying to do things correctly.
Yeah, it definitely. And there was, it's funny when you look at, as deregulation was coming, you have the private carrier conference, which shockingly the ATA owned, and then you have the ATA. And there was a New York Times article that came out right before deregulation, and the private carrier conference had put out this message saying, hey, we would like deregulation to happen, because now they can become like carriers and they don't have to do all this backdoor stuff. And the person who's the head of the ATA at that time, and his name is escaping me, wrote a letter that ended up getting leaked to the New York Times, just tearing the guy apart. Like, we're supposed to be unified on this. Like, we're for the trucking companies. And in that guy's response, he said, I am for the trucking companies. I'm for my trucking companies, which were the private carriers. And that's kind of where that riff, because then I think eventually, like 95 or 97, the private carrier conference ends up becoming its own thing, and they split from the ATA. But a lot of that riff was already there, because the private carrier, the regulated carriers, they didn't want to speak out on it too hard, because getting deregulated would open them up to more opportunities. Because if you'd like listen to any of Fred Caviar's new documentary with the Fullers in Chattanooga and stuff, the one thing that Max Fuller talks about during that time is, it could take 2 or 3 years for the ICC to say yes to you getting authority to haul a thing from point A to point B as your backhaul. Whereas the private carriers, they could just do it. And so what was happening, and there was actually a case in Chicago in one of the motor carrier reports that I found, where 45 carriers in Chicago that were regulated had went to the ICC with a couple people from the railroads that were also regulated, begging them to bring the rates down because the private carriers were stealing all their volume. So while the regulated carriers had the rates and the rights to haul those commodities, they couldn't, because the shippers would give them to the cheaper carriers, which were the private carriers, because they could just skirt around those rules. And another thing that a lot of people don't remember is, if you were a regulated carrier, there was Class A, B, and C, which is just based on how much revenue you brought in. Class A carriers were required to submit monthly accounting reports to the ICC. And it was all your operating expenses. And this is kind of where we get the operating ratio for trucking companies now, is the ICC would go through all your revenue, all your expenses, and if you were submitting a rate request to either for a new commodity or an existing commodity, they would look at what your operating ratio is And if it was below 92% or above 96%, it was an automatic no. They kept you between 92 and 96 for regulated carriers. And that was their policy.
That's very interesting, the price controls and whatnot. And it's sort of, there are free market arguments that are legitimate about the sort of economic effects and the sort of stupidity of all this stuff. The guys I used to work for back home in Canada, the paddocks, they were trying to get their own authority as well, right? Like they operated as like a leased carrier for Stelco or International Iron and Metal Corporation in Canada, and they would they were Earl Paddock's trucks, but like they were hauling somebody else's stuff, but in an exclusive lease arrangement, which made it legal. But other people wanted them to haul their stuff and they couldn't. And at the time in the late 70s, early 80s, they were like, going to court constantly to like try and like push forward their application to become, their own company that didn't have to have, this arrangement. And the people that fought them the most were the Ontario Trucking Association, the OTA, and their member carriers are like, no, we don't want more competition. Fuck you, Earl Paddock. And so, the Paddock boys to this day, and I quote them in my book, God rest your soul, Marty. He passed away in November, but he's like, no, man, the regulated environment sucked. It created haves and have-nots. We couldn't expand our fleet. It was very difficult. And, all the established carriers in Ontario were getting rich because of their position and offering shitty service. And there's tons of work and they couldn't keep up with it all. And this was bullshit and everything should have been deregulated. I think our problem now today is that the deregulation went so far in the opposite direction that there's no control or oversight anymore whatsoever. The FMCSA can't keep a lid on anything, and this is why we have these networks of chameleon carriers. We have anybody can get a motor carrier number with $300 in a pulse. Doesn't matter if you've got trucking experience or not. Nobody's enforcing anything. And that's now producing all of its own problems, right? So the regulated system had tons of problems, economic stuff, preventing people from entering the market, kind of its own shit show. But now the shit show is mostly in safety, because when there's nobody's in charge of anything, you got all kinds of people on the road who probably shouldn't be. And, third world labor arbitrage, all the rest of it. And, Marty used to send me these angry emails when I would talk about the regulation stuff in my Substack or on podcasts. Marty was very, very kind to me as a former employer and, wise old guy. But he sort of had a little bit of that boomer tick to him of like not quite understanding the lingo and getting triggered by certain things I would say. And like assuming that like I am, you interviewed that Michael Belzer guy, you don't want to go back to regulation. I'm like, no, I'm not saying that. I'm just interviewing the guy to like find out what it was all about and hear his argument, right? Because Marty lived through what happened before and saw his dad struggle, and like any talk of doing anything differently than what is going on now just immediately sets him off. And I understand that. And you see that with some Freight X people too, right? Like, oh, don't rock the boat, keep everything status quo. It's like, no. We're not talking about going back to the regulated days. We're just pointing out all the problems with the pendulum having swung to the other complete opposite direction. And like, let's figure out what to do to deal with that. And some sort of boomer types, are so poisoned with zombie Reaganism that anything changing on the government side, they just view it immediately as socialism or communism or whatever. And it's like, no. We're not asking the government to like give people things or to do whatever. We're asking them to stop doing things that are stupid. That's not the same as begging them for money, right?
Right. And the point I would make is, especially going to like the safety thing, right? It was never good. So I've got, and I can share it with you after this, but so in 1966, the DOT is formed, which creates the Bureau of Motor Carrier Safety, which is the predecessor to the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration. In 1977, they published a report. It was a 10-year survey on the effectiveness on this new DOT, and it was awful. So on the cover that I got here, they said over 1/3 of the 54,800 trucks and buses inspected by the federal personnel during 74 and 75 were unsafe and taken off the road. Now at that time, there was 24.5 million trucks under their purview. So that means 54,000 would be 0.002% of all the trucks that they're responsible for. And they only inspected that much, and 1/3 of them were unsafe at any speed. So the Leffler's thing is, one in 5 trucks is unsafe at any speed. Well, in 77, it was 1 in 3 trucks were unsafe at any speed. And when they went back to 65, which was when ICC last had their control, they actually did more safety inspections with less people and less money than the DOT did, because the DOT was focused on projects like noise control and highway was I think they were updating highways at that time. So even though they created this entity to create more safety for carriers, they ended up getting bogged down with projects not related to carrier safety.
Yeah, where have we heard this before? I think getting bogged down with worrying about emissions and compliance with, keeping the sky happy, rather than, hey, hold on a minute. There's all this other stuff we should be considering too.
Right. And what I would say, and what I've said for a while, is honestly, they just need to burn down all the regulations and rebuild them back up. And the pillar that needs to drive the regulation needs to be driver safety and equipment. That should be the main focus.
Yeah, I
everything
agree.
falls behind it.
I agree with that. With the caveat, what do we mean by safety, right? Because this is something I bang on about. There's legitimate safety, and then there's safetyism, right? Safetyism is the belief that, like, safety at all costs, safety at any cost, tick all the boxes, and now magically poof, you're safe, right? This is why we have people wearing fucking yellow vests and high vis gear everywhere, even though it doesn't really do anything. Oh, we're gonna put front collision avoidance systems on trucks, and to put fucking retards behind the wheel that don't know how to drive. But the technology is not going to prevent collisions. It gets spooked. It's got lots of problems. So what I mean by safety versus safetyism, real safety means competent operators behind the wheel. It means people that actually know what they're doing. And everything we've seen done, and I outline this in my book, for the last 40 years, is to chip away at the requirements for that competency and skill. Because if you are competent and skilled and know what you're doing, you're going to command a higher price. And everything is about getting that price down. Lest Amazon have to pay an extra $50 for a load. God help us all if Amazon has to pay a little extra money for a load.
Right. And and to that point, that I had tagged you in that post earlier this week on from 1906, the guy talking about the drivers that he hires. Like, those are the people that we should be hiring. They should know the equipment inside and out, and that is what drives safety. Because if you know the equipment, you're going to want to take care of the equipment. If you want to take care of the equipment, you're going to drive at safer speeds. There's going to be more training involved. There's going to be a longer cycle to get drivers into the cab, which means you're going to have to pay more money. And if that is the pillar that we focus on as a nation, then everything else that makes the industry better falls behind it.
Right. So I'm going to bring up a little anecdote. Something that drives me insane, and I'm sure you understand this, is that thank God equipment actually is made out of like higher quality products, and we have good brake systems and whatnot, and things don't break down like they used to in the past. Because a lot of drivers, when's the last time you ever actually saw, go hang out at a truck stop and just stand and watch in the morning, right? or in the middle of the night and watch the drivers get ready to leave, okay? How many of them actually go out and pop the hood, check their oil, do the air brake checks of like drawing your air down to make sure the emergency systems work? How many guys get underneath and check their push rod stroke and check all the hoses? Well, what's the percentage of guys that actually do that? One, maybe, right? And this is what drives me insane because I was part of that 1%. I always had overalls and a grease gun and brass fittings and extra hoses in the truck. And like if there was a problem, I would fix it myself, right? You have to know your equipment. You have to know how to fix it. You have to understand where the problems come from. And these guys are either they don't know, they've never been taught or trained, or they're lazy and don't give a shit. There's a great Twitter account from a sort of regional police force in Canada, Halton Regional Police Services, I think. And they have their own commercial enforcement division, and they run around the west side of the GTA pulling trucks over constantly. And the pictures they post of the equipment is just incredible. Like no brake pads, fucking brake chambers hanging off, hoses chafed or full of holes, bald tires, just junk equipment. And like, you don't even need to get underneath the truck to be able to see what the problem is. And yet these guys are still going up and down the road. Like this is a human level problem. And this is what I mean in the difference between safety and safetyism, because real safety involves things like ethic. It involves, people that will actually go and do a proper pre-trip inspection, properly maintain and like look out for their equipment. You can't quantify that except to have ticking boxes. So what do guys do? They do their pre-trip inspection on paper and they hit the button on their ELD saying they did it, but they didn't do it. Right? It's clear that a lot of these guys aren't doing it because we're hiring lazy fucking unconscientious gits to get behind the wheels of trucks. But if I say that, I'm a mean person or I'm a racist or I'm a whatever, and it's like, no. I don't care what anybody looks like. Be competent. Be good at what you're doing. Have some pride. Inspect your truck. Carry tools with you. If it's broken, get it fixed. What am I just like some kind of like reactionary old boomer type because I actually care about what trucks look like and I want them to actually be safe? And you have to go do that, right? A lot of people don't. And we keep putting people behind the wheel that don't do it. And patterns start to emerge, right? And if you point out the pattern, you're the bad guy. Instead of this being about, legitimate safety, the safetyism people say, well, he's wearing his high vis vest and he filled out his pre-trip inspection and he passed some minimal test to get his license. Therefore, all the boxes are ticked. Therefore, that guy's a safe operator. Therefore, that guy is exactly the same as me in the eyes of the law. No way, motherfucker. Some guy that just got here from India or Somalia or wherever yesterday, went to a shitty truck driving school for 2 weeks, ticks all the boxes, is not the same as me. I'm sorry. That's not true. And it doesn't matter if I've been bitching about this for years where, the government tries to pull welfare cases out of unemployment offices and put them behind the wheels of trucks. And they're white guys that look like me. And they're just as lazy and incompetent and fucking stupid as the recent arrivals. And I object to all of it. If you are not competent, if you are not skilled, if you do not have the respect for the trucking industry, respect for yourself, respect for the motoring public, I don't want you to get a license. Our entire system is set up to give those people licenses because it makes things cheaper for Amazon and Walmart and whoever else. Name your Fortune 500 company, name your local whoever. It's all about money instead of about honoring skill and competency, and I object to that.
Yeah, and I would say, and I've got like a minute here before I gotta go get the other young one that just woke up. But when you were talking about patterns, like the one pattern I saw that drew me to this point exactly is that 92 to 96% that the ICC kept people at. Because there are a lot of people that think about that time where truck drivers were making a bunch of money and whatever. But that was just a small percent, a very small percent of the overall industry. That wasn't a common thing because a lot of these carriers, especially the regulated ones, they owned private carriers or had some stock in those carriers because what they could do is those accounting requirements were being sent to the ICC. They didn't have to, and they could create these predatory leasing. There's a case in 1947. It's an Oklahoma furniture manufacturer where they had set up a predatory leasing program. They were paying drivers based on the mile, and it was very cheap. And if they weren't moving, they weren't getting paid. And these are all practices that we see today, and it's all just an effort to expand the P&L past that 92 to 96%. And I think practices like that during regulation, when 1980 occurred, it was already a problem. It was just behind closed doors. And then in 1980, dumped gas on the problem, lit it on fire, and said, hey, here it is. Here's what's going on. And let it grow at scale. So then that's how you get the super egos and these chameleon carriers. Like the point that I've made is none of these things happened overnight.
No, they did not. They did
There's
not.
a foundation for it somewhere. And if you look past 1980, hey guys, just a second. If you look past 1980, you will find it. But I'm getting restless.
Yeah,
But,
I mean that's one of the points I make in my book, and in trying to market it to people who are wondering what's going on. And I was on a ladies' podcast last night, my friend Natasha, and people are looking around at what's happening with all the crashes and noticing the patterns, and I'm like, yes, that's a problem, but we also, we didn't just arrive here. This is a historical repetition. It looked different back in the day, but it was a problem back in the day. And then, as you put it, the Motor Carrier Act of 1980 comes along and pours gas on the fire. And then the reactions to the Motor Carrier Act of 1980, the consequences of that piece of legislation were brought forward to assuage the concerns of free marketers, which is fair enough. It was a necessary reform. But then all the free marketers didn't actually want a free market in labor, right? Oh no, we can't get drivers anymore, so now we have to say we don't have enough of them in order to keep the price of labor down, right? So there's hypocrisies, there's patterns, there's historical precedent for all of this stuff. It didn't just start yesterday. It's a long-term issue that just keeps getting worse and worse and worse. And I think that is worthy of investigation and question.
Yeah, I would say it was a free market in revenue, not expenses, and the expenses was the labor.
That's a very good way of putting it, sir. Sounds like you got some fans in the background that want your attention.
Yeah, it's getting to breakfast time.
Yeah, mine are all still sleeping here, so I'm gonna try and see how long I can spool that out for.
Yeah, my time has come to an end. I'm about to have a meltdown.
All right, Stephen Ruhe, how do people find you online, sir? Tell people about your website and your socials and all that.
Yeah, so X is my main thing. It's at Stephen Ruhe. I've been posting a lot of history stuff there. Semihistoric.com is the website. It still needs some love, but as I get better with that, I'll start posting all of my research and everything on there. My goal is to have a dedicated place for resources because a lot of the stuff that I'm getting is coming directly from the National Archives. So I'll start posting a bunch of that stuff on there.
Yeah, I really appreciate your project and what you're doing. This Winton guy and the first sort of tractor trailer, I think that's all very interesting. And I'm really looking forward to more of your stuff coming out, sir. And especially there's a lot of people in the trucking business that are sort of nerds about this stuff and pay attention to the sort of history. And you're going way back, and again, referencing like culture, legal cases, all of the sort of background stuff that's not just the truck going down the road, right? Like, I think that's a very useful thing, and thank you for doing it.
Yeah, I've always been obsessed with history, and getting stuck on this like 2 years ago, it's just been, it got to a point where I was like, I got to get it out to somebody, because my wife doesn't want to listen to me talk about it anymore. So the internet gets to listen to it.
Oh boy, do I ever feel that. All right, I guess we should go take care of our wives and our children. As I like to end every show, way of the road.